Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he knelt on the cracked sidewalk outside the towering glass building on Fifth Avenue. His weathered hands gripped a worn cloth, buffing the leather shoes of yet another rushed businessman who barely acknowledged his existence. But there was one pair of shoes he knew better than his own. Custom Italian Oxfords that appeared every morning at exactly 7:45, belonging to a man who never spoke more than 3 words. Same as usual. For 10 years, Marcus had polished those shoes, watched them walk through puddles and across marble floors, seen them age and get resoled. What he didn't know was that today would be his last day on this corner, and the man behind those shoes was about to change everything he thought he knew about his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, as Marcus Rodriguez arranged his supplies on the familiar patch of sidewalk. His wooden box, scarred by decades of use, held bottles of polish in every shade of brown and black, brushes with bristles worn smooth and cloths that had buffed more shoes than he could count. At 62, his knees protested every morning as he lowered himself to the concrete, but this corner had been his livelihood for over 20 years. This was where he'd raised 3 children, where he'd saved enough to send his youngest daughter to community college, where he'd built a reputation one shoe at a time. The city moved around him like a river, endless streams of people rushing toward their important lives. Most barely saw him, just another fixture of urban landscape, as permanent and overlooked as the fire hydrants and street lamps. But Marcus saw everything. He knew which executives were having affairs by the frequency of their shoe shines. He could tell when someone was struggling financially, by how long they stretched between visits. He watched relationships bloom and crumble, careers rise and fall, all from his vantage point at knee level. At 7:45 sharp, the Italian Oxfords appeared. Marcus didn't need to look up to recognize them. The distinctive stitching along the toe, the particular way the left heel showed slightly more wear than the right, the small scratch near the ankle that had been there for 3 years. The man who wore them was tall. Marcus knew that much from the shadow he cast. But in all their interactions, Marcus had never actually looked at his face. It wasn't his place to stare. The wealthy didn't like to be studied by people like him. Same as usual, came the familiar voice, deep and measured, with the slightest trace of an accent Marcus could never quite place. The man would stand perfectly still while Marcus worked, occasionally shifting his weight but never impatiently. Unlike others who tapped their feet or checked their phones, this customer seemed content to wait, to let Marcus take his time with the ritual they'd perfected over a decade. Marcus began with the cleaning cloth, removing the dust and grime of yesterday's journey. These shoes told stories: conference rooms and corner offices, business lunches and late-night strategy sessions. He applied the polish with careful strokes, working it deep into the leather, feeling for imperfections and treating each one with the patience of a craftsman. The brushing came next, his arm moving in practiced rhythms that had become as natural as breathing. Finally, the buffing cloth brought out the mirror shine that was his signature, the finish that had earned him the loyalty of customers who could afford to have their shoes shined anywhere in the city. "Beautiful work, as always," the man said as Marcus finished, dropping a $20 bill into the wooden box. It was twice the standard rate, the same generous tip he'd left every morning for 10 years. Marcus had tried to protest the first few times, but the man had simply smiled and walked away. Eventually, Marcus learned to accept the kindness without question, using the extra money to help his grandchildren with school supplies and birthday presents. As the Italian Oxfords disappeared into the morning crowd, Marcus felt an unusual weight in his chest. Today was different, though he couldn't explain why. The doctor's appointment yesterday had gone exactly as he'd feared. His hands were showing signs of arthritis that would only worsen with time. His knees were shot, his back ached constantly. At his age, with no savings left after his wife's medical bills, he should probably keep working until he couldn't physically manage it anymore. But Dr. Patterson had been clear. Continue this work, and he'd be in constant pain within a year, possibly unable to use his hands at all within 2. The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop brought him coffee and a pastry, as she had every Tuesday for the past 5 years. Young professionals stopped for quick touch-ups before important meetings. Regular customers shared fragments of their lives, promotions and divorces, children's graduations and parents' funerals. Marcus listened to it all, offering comfort where he could, celebrating their victories as if they were his own. But throughout the day, he found himself thinking about the Italian Oxfords. In 10 years, he and their owner had never had a real conversation. The man was clearly successful, probably powerful, definitely wealthy. Yet there was something in his manner, a quiet respect, a genuine appreciation for craftsmanship, that set him apart from other high-end customers. Marcus had always wondered about him. Imagine the life those perfectly polished shoes led when they left his corner. By late afternoon, Marcus had made his decision. Tomorrow would be his last day. He'd spend the evening writing letters to his regular customers, thanking them for their business and recommending other shoe shiners in the area. He'd clean and organize his equipment one final time, and he'd say goodbye to 20 years of mornings on this corner, to the rhythm of brushes and cloths, to the satisfaction of transforming scuffed leather into mirrors. That evening, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table in his one-bedroom apartment, writing by hand on paper he'd bought specially for the occasion. Each letter was personal, reflecting the relationship he'd built with customers over months or years of brief encounters. To Mr. Sullivan, who always asked about Marcus's grandchildren. To Ms. Rodriguez, who shared his name and sometimes spoke to him in Spanish when she was homesick. To the young lawyer who'd been coming for 5 years and still tipped like he was making partner money, instead of barely covering his student loans. But when he reached the letter for the Italian Oxfords, Marcus paused. He didn't even know the man's name. In 10 years of faithful service, twice-a-week visits, generous tips and polite exchanges, they'd never introduced themselves. Marcus realized with a start that this customer, who had been more consistent than any other, remained a complete stranger. All he could write was to the gentleman with the Italian Oxfords, and a simple thank you for 10 years of loyalty and kindness. Sleep came fitfully that night. Marcus dreamed of shoes, endless pairs marching past him, some stopping, some ignoring him completely. He woke before dawn, his hands already aching as if they remembered the work they'd soon leave behind. As he prepared his equipment for the final time, each familiar motion felt weighted with significance. The polished bottles caught the morning light like small amber jewels. The brushes sat in their appointed places like old friends saying goodbye. The walk to his corner felt longer than usual. Marcus found himself noticing details he'd overlooked for years. The way the morning sun struck the glass facade of the building, the patterns worn into the sidewalk by millions of footsteps. The small tree that had somehow survived in its tiny square of soil, growing taller each year despite the city's attempts to contain it. He set up his station with extra care, arranging everything precisely as he had for 2 decades. The familiar weight of the wooden box. The preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Smell of leather and polish. The sounds of the city waking up around him. It all felt precious now, invested with the poignancy of endings. His first customer was a young woman he'd never seen before, nervous about a job interview, grateful for his reassurance that her shoes looked perfect. An older gentleman stopped for his monthly treatment, chatting about his retirement plans as Marcus worked. A businessman rushed past, then turned back, apologizing for not having time today but pressing a $10 bill into Marcus's hand anyway. At 7:45, the Italian Oxfords arrived right on schedule. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he looked down at the familiar shoes. How many times had he knelt here, polishing this same leather, perfecting this same shine? The shoes were like old friends, their every scratch and scuff as familiar as the lines on his own palms. "Same as usual," the man said, but Marcus detected something different in his voice, a slight roughness, as if he too was feeling the weight of the moment. Marcus began the ritual for the last time. His hands moved with practiced precision, but his heart was heavy. Each stroke of the brush, each sweep of the cloth, carried the knowledge that this was the end. He found himself working more slowly than usual, reluctant to finish, to let these 10 years of connection slip away. As he applied the final buffing strokes, bringing the leather to its signature mirror shine, Marcus realized he couldn't let this moment pass without acknowledgement. He looked up for the first time in 10 years of service, meeting his customer's eyes directly. The face that looked back at him was kind but tired, with silver threading through dark hair and lines that spoke of responsibility and difficult decisions. But what struck Marcus most were the eyes, intelligent and warm, with a sadness that seemed oddly familiar. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to know that tomorrow will be my last day here. I'm retiring, and I wanted to thank you personally. In 10 years, you've never missed a week. Your kindness has meant more to me than you know." The man's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Marcus Rodriguez," he said, and hearing his own name from this stranger's lips sent a shock through Marcus's system. "I know this is your last day. In fact, I'm the reason you're leaving." Marcus stared up at him, confusion clouding his features. "I don't understand, sir." The man knelt down, bringing himself to Marcus's level on the sidewalk. Up close, Marcus could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of whatever burden he carried. "My name is Dr. James Patterson," he said quietly. "I'm your doctor." The world seemed to tilt around Marcus. The envelope in Dr. Patterson's hands, the familiar voice that he'd heard in his office just 2 days ago delivering the devastating news about his arthritis, the kindness that had always set this customer apart. It all clicked into place with jarring clarity. "You've been coming to me," Marcus whispered, "all these years, and you knew." "I knew who you were from the first day," Dr. Patterson said gently. "When I moved my practice to this building 10 years ago, I saw you here every morning on my way to work. I'd been treating your wife Elena for her cancer, and I knew how hard you were working to pay for her treatments. I knew about your children, your grandchildren, your dreams for their futures." Marcus felt tears stinging his eyes. Elena had been gone for 3 years now, but he remembered those brutal months of treatments, the crushing weight of medical bills, the way they'd eaten through every penny of savings and still demanded more. Dr. Patterson opened the envelope and pulled out a thick folder. "Every tip I gave you, every extra dollar, I invested it for you. I opened an account in your name, put money in it twice a week for 10 years. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I knew you'd never accept charity. You're too proud, too independent. But watching you work, seeing your dedication and skill, your kindness to every customer, I couldn't stand by and let you struggle when I had the power to help." He handed Marcus the folder. Inside were bank statements, investment records, and a final balance that made Marcus's hands shake. $247,000. A lifetime of savings created 2 $20 bills at a time. The arthritis diagnosis. Dr. Patterson continued, "I've been dreading this day for months. I knew it was coming. I could see the signs in your hands, the way you favored your right knee. I've been preparing for this moment, hoping I'd have enough time to build something that would take care of you." Marcus stared at the papers, unable to process what he was seeing. "But why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Dr. Patterson sat back on his heels, his expensive suit somehow not looking out of place on the dirty sidewalk. "Because 20 years ago, I was a young resident working impossible hours, struggling to pay off medical school loans. I was living on coffee and whatever free food I could find at the hospital. One morning, rushing to work, my shoe came apart completely, the sole just separated from the upper. I was mortified. Couldn't afford new ones, didn't know what to do." He looked down at his perfectly polished Oxfords. "There was an old man on this corner then, Miguel, I think his name was. Your predecessor. I explained my situation, and he didn't just fix my shoe with some kind of miracle glue and leather work. He refused to let me pay. Said he remembered being young and broke, that someone had helped him once when he needed it most. He told me to pass it forward when I could." Marcus's eyes widened. Miguel had been his mentor, the man who'd taught him the trade when he'd first arrived in the city, with nothing but hope and a strong back. Miguel had worked this corner for 30 years before arthritis forced him to retire, passing the location to Marcus like a family legacy. "When Miguel got sick," Dr. Patterson continued, "I was his doctor too. He told me about you, about how proud he was of the man who'd taken over his corner. He made me promise to watch out for you, to help if I ever could. When he died, I felt like I'd failed him. But then I realized I could honor his memory by being for you what that anonymous benefactor had been for him all those years ago." The morning rush swirled around them. but Marcus felt as if they were alone in the world. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about this corner, about the man who'd silently supported him for 10 years was transformed. The Italian Oxfords weren't just shoes. They were a connection spanning generations of kindness. "The account has enough for you to retire comfortably," Dr. Patterson said. "But there's something else." He pulled out another envelope. "I've been talking to the management company that owns this building. They're planning to develop the whole block, turn it into a mixed-use complex with retail on the ground floor. I've convinced them to include a high-end shoe care shop as one of the anchor tenants. Not a sidewalk operation. A real business with chairs for customers, proper equipment, maybe even space for an apprentice program." Marcus looked up at the towering building that had been his backdrop for 20 years. "You want me to run it?" "I want you to own it," Dr. Patterson said firmly. "The initial investment is all arranged. The space will be ready in 6 months. You'll have time to rest, to let your hands heal, to plan how you want to do this. But Marcus, you're an artist. What you do with leather and polish, that's a craft that's disappearing. The world needs people like you, but it needs to value them properly." Through his tears, Marcus began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, but grew into something bigger. A release of 20 years of worry and uncertainty and quiet desperation. "All this time," he said, "I thought I was just shining your shoes." "You were doing so much more than that," Dr. Patterson replied. "You were showing me what dignity looks like, what pride in work means. Every morning, watching you transform scuffed leather into something beautiful, it reminded me why I became a doctor. To heal things, to make them better than they were." As the reality of his situation settled over him, Marcus felt a profound shift in his understanding of his place in the world. He wasn't just a shoe shiner whose time had run out. He was a craftsman whose work had been valued and protected by someone who understood its worth. He was the recipient of a kindness that stretched back decades, a kindness he was now positioned to pass forward. "The young people who work in this building," Marcus said slowly, "they rush past so fast they don't even see me. But some of them, they have good shoes that never get proper care. They don't know how to maintain them, how to make them last." Dr. Patterson smiled. "Exactly. You could teach them, not just the technical skills, but the patience, the attention to detail, the pride in doing something right." Marcus looked around his corner one more time, seeing it differently now. This wasn't an ending, it was a transformation. The wooden box that had been his office would become a real shop. The sidewalk that had been his workshop would become a proper business. The relationships he'd built, one shoe at a time, would become the foundation for something larger. "Miguel always said that shoes carry stories," Marcus murmured. "Every scuff is a journey, every worn spot is a life lived. He taught me to read those stories, to understand what the leather was telling me." "And now, you can teach others to read them too," Dr. Patterson said. "To understand that taking care of things, shoes, relationships, dreams, is how we show respect for the journeys we're all on." As the morning crowd began to thin, Dr. Patterson stood and straightened his jacket. "I have to get to work," he said. "But Marcus, I want you to know, these 10 years, watching you work, seeing your dedication and kindness, it's been one of the privileges of my life. When I retire someday, I hope I can do it with half the grace you're showing." Marcus rose too, his knees protesting but his heart light. He looked down at the Italian Oxfords one more time, then up at the man who had worn them to him every week for a decade. "Dr. Patterson," he said, "when the new shop opens, I hope you'll be my first customer." "I wouldn't miss it," Dr. Patterson replied, shaking Marcus's hand with genuine warmth. "Same time, same shine, just a different address." As Dr. Patterson walked away, disappearing into the crowd that flowed toward the building's entrance, Marcus began packing up his equipment for the last time. But instead of sadness, he felt anticipation. Each polish bottle he wrapped, each brush he cleaned, was being prepared for a new chapter rather than an ending. Mrs. Chen appeared with her usual coffee and pastry, but today she also brought a small envelope. "This is from all the shop owners on the block," she said. "We're going to miss seeing you here every morning, Marcus. You've been part of our neighborhood family for so long." Inside the envelope was a card signed by dozens of people, shop owners, office workers, regular customers, and many others he recognized but had never formally met. The messages were simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for your kindness. You always made my mornings brighter. Your work was always perfect. You'll be missed." As he read through the notes, Marcus realized that his corner had been the center of a community he'd never fully recognized. All these years he'd thought of himself as invisible, just another part of the urban landscape. But he'd been seen, valued, appreciated by more people than he'd ever imagined. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, many of whom seemed to know this was his final day. Word had spread through the informal network of downtown workers, and people were stopping by to say goodbye, to share memories, to thank him for years of reliable service. Some brought tips far larger than usual. Others brought small gifts, a coffee mug, a scarf for the cold mornings, a photo of him at work that someone had taken and kept. As the day wound down and the shadows grew long, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He'd arrived in this city with nothing, taken over a corner from an old man who'd seen potential in him, and built a life one shoe at a time. He'd raised his children with the money earned from his wooden box. He'd supported his wife through her illness with the generosity of customers who became friends. He'd survived losses and celebrated victories, all while kneeling on the same patch of sidewalk, perfecting the same ancient craft. And now, through a kindness so profound it took his breath away, he was being given the chance to transform that craft into something greater. Not just a survival strategy, but a business. Not just a corner on the sidewalk, but a place where the art of shoe care could be taught and preserved. Not just a way to make ends meet, but a way to pass forward the kindness that had been passed to him. As he walked home that evening carrying his wooden box for the last time, Marcus thought about Miguel's words. Shoes carry stories. His own shoes, worn thin from 20 years of standing on concrete, told the story of persistence and dignity. Dr. Patterson's Italian Oxfords told the story of quiet generosity and professional success used in service of others. The shoes of every customer who'd stopped at his corner told stories of dreams pursued, challenges faced, lives lived with purpose and hope. Soon, in a proper shop with proper equipment, he'd be helping new shoes begin their stories, teaching others to read the tales that leather could tell, passing on skills that connected him to generations of craftsmen who'd understood that there was honor in making things beautiful, in caring for the tools that carried people through their days. The next morning, Marcus woke early out of habit but didn't reach for his work clothes. Instead, he put on his best shirt, combed his hair carefully, and walked to his corner one more time. He didn't bring his equipment, just a simple thank you sign that he placed where his wooden box had sat for 20 years. Within minutes, people began stopping. Office workers heading to their jobs, shop owners opening their businesses, regular customers who'd forgotten he was retiring. The impromptu gathering grew throughout the morning as word spread. Someone brought flowers. Someone else brought coffee and pastries for everyone. Dr. Patterson appeared right on schedule at 7:45, his Italian Oxfords gleaming in the morning sun. "Ready for the next chapter?" he asked Marcus. Marcus looked around at the crowd of people who'd come to see him off. People whose names he might not know but whose shoes he'd cared for, whose days he'd started with a moment of attention and craftsmanship. People who'd been part of his life without him fully realizing it, who'd valued his work enough to mark its ending with their presence. "More ready than I've ever been," Marcus replied. 6 months later, Rodriguez Fine Shoe Care opened its doors in the ground floor of the building that had towered over Marcus's corner for 20 years. The shop was elegant but welcoming, with comfortable chairs for customers, state-of-the-art equipment, and walls lined with the tools of a trade that stretched back centuries. But the most important feature was the workshop area visible through a glass wall, where Marcus worked alongside 2 young apprentices, teaching them not just the techniques of shoe care, but the philosophy behind it. "Respect the leather," he told them as they practiced on donated shoes. "Every pair has been somewhere, carried someone through important moments. Our job isn't just to clean and polish. It's to honor the journey and prepare for the next one." Dr. Patterson was indeed the first customer, arriving at 7:45 sharp on opening day. As Marcus knelt to work on the familiar Italian Oxfords, both men smiled at the continuation of their routine, But now, instead of a hurried sidewalk encounter, they had time to talk, to share stories, to acknowledge the friendship that had grown from years of silent service and secret generosity. "Same as usual?" Marcus asked, applying polish with the same careful strokes he'd perfected over 2 decades. "Same as usual," Dr. Patterson replied, "but better." As word spread about the shop, customers began arriving not just for shoe care, but for the experience of watching a master craftsman at work. Business executives brought their children to learn about taking care of their belongings. Young professionals discovered the satisfaction of properly maintained shoes. Even tourists found their way to the shop, drawn by the reputation of an artist who could make leather sing. But the moments Marcus treasured most were when former customers from his corner days stopped by. Mrs. Chen brought flowers for the opening and returned weekly with homemade treats. The young lawyer, now making partner money, brought his colleagues to experience what he called the best shoe shine in the city. Regular customers who'd followed him from the sidewalk to the shop, maintaining relationships that had begun with nothing more than mutual respect and reliable service. 1 year after opening, Marcus hired his 3rd apprentice, a young woman whose own shoes told a story of hard work and determination. As he taught her to read the language of leather, to understand what scuffs and wear patterns revealed about their owners, he thought about the chain of kindness that had brought him to this moment. Miguel, who'd seen potential in a desperate immigrant and taught him a trade. Dr. Patterson, who'd invested in that potential for 10 years without asking for recognition. The community of customers who'd valued his work enough to support his transition to business owner. And now Marcus himself, passing forward skills and opportunities to the next generation. Late one evening, as he closed the shop and walked home through streets that no longer seemed indifferent, Marcus reflected on the journey from his corner to this new life. The Italian Oxford still came twice a week, still required the same careful attention, still belonged to a man who understood the value of craftsmanship and kindness. But now they were part of something larger, a business built on the foundation of relationships, a place where the ancient art of shoe care was preserved and celebrated. In his apartment, Marcus kept Miguel's old wooden box on a shelf of honor. Sometimes he'd take it down and run his fingers over its scarred surface, remembering the man who'd taught him that dignity came not from what you did, but how well you did it. Next to it sat a framed photo from the shop's opening day. Marcus with his apprentices, Dr. Patterson cutting a ribbon, Mrs. Chen, and dozens of other faces from his corner days gathered to celebrate his transformation. But the item he treasured most was a simple handwritten note from Dr. Patterson, framed and hanging in the shop's front window where everyone could see it. Excellence in craftsmanship, integrity in service, kindness in all interactions. These are the foundations of a life well lived and a business well run. Marcus Rodriguez embodies all of these qualities and more. Below it, in Marcus's own careful handwriting, was Miguel's old saying, "Shoes carry stories. It is our privilege to help them tell those stories beautifully." As Marcus settled into sleep each night, he thought about the stories being written on the shoes he'd cared for that day, the apprentices learning skills that would serve them for decades, the customers who'd left with not just polished leather, but renewed confidence in their ability to face whatever lay ahead. The corner where he'd spent 20 years was now part of a construction zone, being transformed into something new and modern. But the relationships built there, the skills developed there, the kindness exchanged there, all of that lived on in the shop, in the apprentices, in the customers who still sought out the man who'd turned shoe shining into an art form. Some mornings, Marcus would arrive early at the shop and stand in the exact spot where his corner had been. The familiar rhythm of the city continued around him. People rushing to work, pursuing dreams, facing challenges, living their lives one step at a time. And in his shop, he continued his part in those stories, ensuring that the shoes carrying people through their days were prepared for whatever journeys lay ahead. The Italian Oxfords still appeared twice a week, still required the same careful attention, still belonged to the man who'd changed everything by seeing value where others saw only service. But now they were part of a larger story, one of kindness rewarded, talent recognized, and dreams transformed from survival into legacy. In the end, Marcus realized Miguel had been right about more than just shoes carrying stories. People carried stories too, stories of struggle and hope, of kindness given and received, of lives interconnected in ways that only became clear with time and perspective. His story had begun with nothing but willingness to work and learn, Dr. Patterson's generosity had given it new chapters. And now, with his shop thriving and his apprentices learning, Marcus was helping to write the opening chapters of other people's stories. Young craftspeople who would carry forward skills and values that connected them to generations of artisans who'd understood that there was honor in making things beautiful, dignity in caring for what others entrusted to you, and joy in passing forward the kindness you'd received. The wooden box was retired, but the work continued. The corner was gone, but the community remained. The 20-year routine had ended, but the relationship, built $2.20 at a time, had evolved into something richer and more meaningful than either man could have imagined when it began with a simple, same as usual, on a busy sidewalk all those years ago. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.